Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. And we are live. John Perkins. Mr. Perkins, John, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to be talking to you. How are you?
Great. It's my pleasure to be with you, Ephraim.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, as a quick introduction, I mentioned to you when you spoke the other day, but I read your book and it immediately blew my mind. The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and I'm going to try to make the conversation, I guess, or ask my questions as pointed and condensed as possible, so we could try and make this, as packed with information as it could be. But can you give me a brief breakdown of what the hitmen do? By the way, I found your YouTube little animation that I thought was really excellent, so I'm going to post the link to that too. But
Yeah,
what was your responsibility?
yeah. I should say that animation I had nothing to do with. It just appeared. It uses my voice, but they never asked my permission.
No
So I use
way! I
it.
thought that was
I
you.
I often use it because I don't ask their permission. I've actually tried, but they don't seem to exist anymore. But I love it. I think it's a great video, and I like to say it's very humbling because it does in 2 minutes what I have to spend 250 pages in a book to try to do. And it pretty much covers what an economic hitman does. So yeah, so it's pretty hilarious. It's a lot of fun. So I encourage your viewers to watch. It's accurate. It's very accurate.
It
Uh,
felt like it. It felt like the best Spark Notes I've ever seen. You know?
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, my real title is Chief Economist at a major Boston-based consulting firm, and but and I had a staff of anywhere from 10 to 50 people at different times. And what my job really entailed was identifying countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil or other resources. Today, it might be more of the rare minerals and lithium, cobalt, things that are used in high tech. And once we identified that country, to convince the country to take a huge loan from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations, the money never actually went to the country. The resource was used as collateral, so the country signed off on the loan. But the money actually went to our own corporations, big engineering corporations like Bechtel or Halliburton or Brown and Root or Stone and Webster,
Mhm.
to build large infrastructure projects in that country. Things like uh, electric power systems, highways, ports, airports, industrial parks. And these were things that benefited a few wealthy families in those countries, the people who owned the businesses, the industries, the commercial establishments. And they benefited tremendously from this improved infrastructure, as of course did international corporations, our corporations, and of course the engineering companies that built the projects made huge profits off of it.
Right.
But the majority of the people in the country suffered because money was diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to pay the interest on the loans. And in the end, the country couldn't pay the principal. So we'd go back, usually under the guise of the International Monetary Fund, and say, "Hey, since you can't pay your debts, you owe us.
Mhm.
Sell your oil real cheap. It's your collateral. Sell it real cheap to our oil companies without environmental or social regulations. Let us
Mhm.
build a military base on your soil. Sell off your water and sewage systems and other public utilities to our investors. Vote with us on the next United Nations vote against Cuba or some such
Yeah.
thing." And in that way, we were really building a global economy.
Yeah. And that was, as I was reading the book, I think even within the first 10, 15 pages, I was struck, and then it was kept on getting further reinforced, but by the notion that there was America, the empire, that was acting along the interests of any empire, which is to expand, and then there's America, the homeland, which is, the people that are kind of just funding and living there. Um, the question I wanted to ask is when we, like, for example, let's say hypothetically, or like in your case, when you were dealing with working in Panama, and the government, let's say we gave, or the World Bank gave a loan to the government in Panama to build their infrastructure. That's taxpayer dollars going to the country, correct? It's American taxpayer dollars going to Panama.
Yes, often very indirectly through the World Bank or the Inter-American Development Bank. Yeah, which the United States is not the only, but the primary financer of those institutions.
And
So
then who gets paid back at the end of the loan? Who is Panama pay return the loan to directly to the corporations that are doing the work, or to the World Bank,
no, to
or
the
back to
World
the
Bank.
GDP?
The World Bank makes the loan. Then the money is used to hire American companies
Ah,
to build these infrastructure projects. And I should mention also that it was my job was pretty easy because uh, I like to make the kind of it's a metaphor, but I say that I walk into a president's office and say, hey, in this hand I've got a few $1 billion to
hmm,
build these projects that are going to help you and your friends and your family because
yeah,
you own the industries. And if you don't agree to this deal, in this hand I got a gun.
yeah,
And I didn't actually carry a gun, but I knew, and he knew, the president knew, that the people right behind me, we call jackals, did carry guns. And we have a long history of overthrowing or assassinating governments, for example, Allende in Chile, and Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and on and on and on. The list is very long. So, a president's faced with this choice. Do I take this money and put my country deep into debt and help my family and friends? Or do I risk being overthrown or assassinated?
yeah. It's a pretty impossible position to be in, I imagine. You know.
Well, it's not much of a choice, frankly, for most people. Now, the president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and the president and the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, were the only clients I had that did not buy the deal. They took the risk and they both ended up dying very suspicious deaths in their private airplanes.
Wow. And they were both people that you admired greatly, right? I mean, at least the tone of your book indicates that they were both very admirable and,
Yeah,
great leaders.
yeah, they were guys with a lot of integrity. And I frankly had mixed feelings because my job was to bring them around, and I was I was ambitious. I wanted to be successful in my job, but I also liked them, especially Omar Torrijos of Panama, who was extremely charismatic. He was a party animal. He was a really good president, but he also liked to enjoy life, and we became quite good. I felt like we were good friends. And I had very, very mixed feelings that I wanted to succeed at my job. But on the other hand, I really admired these guys for taking a
Yeah.
stand. I was idealistic, and it may to sound to your listeners like, well, no, how could you be idealistic and do this job? But for most of the time I did the job, I believed I was doing the right thing because statistically, we can show that when you invest this money in infrastructure projects in a poor country, you grow
Mhm.
the economy. The GDP increases rapidly and significantly, and it does.
Mhm.
And GDP per capita, which makes it sound as though everybody in the country is doing better per capita. Wow, that's everybody. And so that's what I was taught in business school. And the World Bank continued to promote this. And so I believed in this for a lot of the time. And it was really Omar Torrijos of Panama who took me aside one time and said, John, don't you realize that you're lying to yourself and to the world? Uh, GDP only measures how well the really wealthy are doing and the big international corporations. It measures what kind of wealth they're bringing to the rich people of the country. And GDP per capita is simply that number divided by the number of people in the country. It doesn't really tell you anything about how
Right.
well the average citizen is doing.
Right, right, right. So is there I guess in a more ideal world, in a little bit more of a, let's say, moral way or a fair way of, trying to make these kind of deals, what would be what steps along the way would enable the population of the country that you're actually giving the loan to actually succeed? Would it be that the interest wouldn't be as high? Would it be that you're not giving them a loan that's so huge that they couldn't afford to pay back? It would be a smaller loan. What would have to be the steps that would actually allow a country to actually become, more wealthy and more modernized, I guess.
Yeah, that's a key question, and it's a question that I spent a lot of time in Latin America today, and I just came back from a former Soviet country and the Middle East and Europe, uh, and I'm asked that question a lot by these countries and by African countries, and my response is, the, I think the best way in the long run is to recognize that you have resources that the world wants. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. And in the case of Africa, it's the wealthiest continent in the world based on resources. And the
I didn't
poorest
know
country,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's got the most resources. It's got incredible resources. Probably Latin America's second, and yet
Hmm.
they're very, very poor from a human standpoint, from an average human standpoint. And but if they could come together, could unite, uh, and say, like, we're not going to take on this debt at these with these outrageous conditions. Yeah, we don't have the technology to develop some of these resources. We need your help, U.S. or now China
Hmm.
and other parts of the world. We need your industry. We need your technological know-how. But these are our resources,
Yeah.
and so we expect you to help us develop value added. We don't want to just produce barrels of oil that you ship out and send to your refineries. We want refineries here. And beyond that, we want plastic companies. We want the companies that use the oil to do things other than just power cars. We want industry here. We demand that we're not going to continue this process. But really, that's going to take a united effort on the part of many of these countries. And in both Africa and Latin America, they'll tell you, they have this long history of division. It's a lot of it was imposed. It's a result of colonialism by the Portuguese and the Spaniards in Latin America and now the Americans, and by
Hmm.
the Dutch and the British and the French and others in Africa. So they have this history of division. It makes it hard to do this. But I like to look back to the U.S. history. There was a lot of divisiveness between the 13 colonies back in the
Right.
1770s. The South had very different interests than the North. And within each of the colonies in the North and each of the colonies in the South, they had different interests from their neighboring. There
Sure.
was a lot of divisiveness. It took an effort. It took a big effort. It took a tremendous amount of politicking by people like John Adams and Benjamin Franklin and others to pull people together, but they did it. So they became united, and I really want to encourage Africa and Latin America to do something similar. It doesn't require all the countries, but it requires a significant number that have these resources that the world desperately wants.
Sure. 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 I mean, and I guess piggybacking on this notion, there's more opportunity now than ever to kind of for democratized news and information and messaging to get across, especially on different platforms that, because like what so let's say America or China goes to Africa, America or China or both of us go to Africa and say, hey, we want, X, Y, and Z resources. And they say, well, we know these resources are valuable to you. We insist on, being dealt a fair hand, in these negotiations. They say, well, we have the money in one hand, we have the jackals in the other hand. And they say, well, we have a microphone, or we have the world, we have the voice of, civility and humanity, on our sides. And like what you said, I think it would require a massive organized effort of just saying we're not being treated fairly for the whole world to be like, oh my gosh, they're not being treated fairly, and to take a step. I mean, that's you could definitely make the argument that Hamas and Gaza are currently winning or have been winning the PR war for the last 2 years relative to Israel, just by the fact that the sentiment overwhelmingly lies with them at the moment. And I think that if any country that was quote unquote on the bottom, could manage to rally some kind of effort and democratize the information and make their voices unified, then you really have a chance of fighting.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. And incidentally, it may be that Hamas and Palestine, the Palestinians are winning, but in a way, it's actually Netanyahu and his administration that's losing the propaganda war. I mean, shooting themselves in the foot. But both. It takes
Yeah.
both. And I think
It,
that's a really good point that I emphasize what needs to be done in Africa and Latin America. But at the same time, the people of the United States need to be better educated about this. So we have this sense, like people will tell me, well, why are they demonstrating against our embassy in Ecuador or wherever? Well, we're just there to help them. Well,
yeah.
that embassy is not there to help the people of Ecuador or any other country for the most part. That may not be true. Maybe they are there to help countries to some degree in Europe, but really that embassy is there to serve the interests of American corporations for the most part, and American foreign policy, which right now and for quite some time has been very expansionistic. It's the most
Sure.
expansionist now, I think, despite the fact that Trump came into the presidency saying he didn't want to get involved in these things, but that's been our history of getting involved in these things and expanding and expanding. And so, but Americans don't understand that. We truly think, I believe that a majority of Americans truly believe that what we're doing in these other countries is helping them, and
Yeah.
maybe to their detriment that, oh, we can't help them. Well, it's true that we shouldn't be helping them in ways that exploit them, but we can offer services, technology, and money to help, but only if it truly is used to
To help.
develop, yeah,
Yeah.
and to develop these countries, to develop
Yeah.
industries and businesses in these countries, help employment in these countries. We talk about the immigration problem. The immigration problem is a problem because we've created economies in Central America that are just exploited by our corporations. NAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and I mean the North American Free Trade Agreement, and CAFTA, the Central American, are totally biased toward helping our big corporations, and in the process, making it very, very difficult for the average person in much of Central America to make a living. So they emigrate.
Yeah, yeah. I want to. So what I can vouch for both myself anecdotally and with really almost everyone that I know. Uh, I know only a handful of people that know much about any other part of the world other than America that grew up here, and even then, what they know is severely limited. And so actually, I do want to dedicate probably a chunk of this recording to talking a little bit about other countries, especially from your experience. I think that that'd be extremely valuable. Um, One thing I wanted to ask for you to please elaborate on a little bit was the notion of a corporatocracy that you've discussed, because I think that the way that you expressed it in the book, at least, had put it into such plain and digestible terms, a notion that primarily um, has been kind of put aside for the kooks, for the conspiracy theorists, and you walk around with terms like a deep state or whatever it is. But there is there is this notion of a corporatocracy. Can you explain what that is, please?
Yeah, well, what I've written about as a corporatocracy is not really a conspiracy theory as such, or this sort of overarching agreement that the Bilderberg or whenever that get together to be in dark corners and
Sure.
to plot things. But the conspiracy, if you want to call it that, is a philosophy that is part of what I call predatory capitalism, which is the kind of capitalism that rules the world right now. And that
Hmm.
philosophy is that you maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. That drives these corporations, and it pretty much drives our governments to set up policies that help us maximize materialistic consumption and short-term profits for corporations. Now, corporations need to make profits. All businesses do, but they don't need to maximize them to the extent that they just basically disregard the future. you
Right.
know, and the idea of maximizing profits regardless of the social and environmental costs is ridiculous when you think
Hmm.
about it. Uh,
Hmm.
and yet that's the driving force. So let's say you take the oil companies, and you may have Exxon and Chevron and Shell are all competing for you at the gas pump. They're all advertising our oil is better than their oil. It's basically all the same, but that's what they're doing. But but if any country in the United States or any of the countries where they have oil wells it begins to look like they're going to institute policies that in some way are going to negatively impact the oil companies, they all basically they don't have to come together in a dark room and agree to do this. They don't even have to meet with each other. They
Sure.
just automatically know we're all going to fight to get rid of this policy, to keep this policy down. We're going to spend a lot of money on we at Shell are going to hire our lawyers, and you at Texaco or Chevron are going to hire your lawyers, and we're all going to fight this policy. And that goes through all the various industries, whether it's retail or food production or chemicals or
Sure.
pharmaceuticals. So that's this corporatocracy. But on top of that, you've got the fact that most of our government officials uh, uh, come out of the corporate world or plan on going into it when they leave the government.
Right. The
At
revolving
very
door.
yeah, the revolving door, and that's a form of corruption that's been legalized. It's not corruption legally speaking, but it is corruption on from any standpoint. And of course, these last few years, it's gotten a lot worse. Or these last few months, I mean to say, it's gotten a lot worse. The Trump administration is blatant about it, which may be a good thing because it's bringing to the surface the fact that presidents and other politicians use their positions to enhance their own personal wealth and that of their friends and cronies.
Yeah. 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 It's been, I don't know whether this is just the media that I've been consuming lately or whether or not this is the zeitgeist, but it certainly feels as if it's been a lot more blatant. The transfer of wealth, prestige, and power is like unfolding in front of people's eyes, and it almost and then at the same time, life becomes a lot more difficult for the middle, lower, economic class of individuals, and there's just nothing like you could just it's like a silent groan, like there's not really much that's happening other than everyone just kind of throwing up their hands and being like, well, I
Yeah.
guess I guess this is life now. I guess there's really it doesn't even feel like there's necessarily a way out. Do you have any kind of hope or what kind of positive other than I guess messaging other than the speaking and the coming together that we were talking about? Is there anything else that could happen?
Yeah. I think, yeah, first of all, yeah, it's definitely gotten worse. So I actually think we have developed the conspiracy theory is in a way coming true. It's self-realization. I think we have, in the last months, we've been moving beyond the kind of uh, corporatocracy that I talked about.
Hmm.
Uh, and we've been moving much more into an overt one, an oligarchy.
Yeah.
And that's not just true in the United States. It's been happening in many, many other countries, Argentina, and well, so many countries, Italy, countries in Europe, are moving in this direction increasingly.
Hmm.
And I think the message here is it's these terrible mistakes that we've all made in the past. Those in power, those or not even necessarily in power. I don't consider myself to be in power, but I'm part of this white American privileged class, and we've kind of sat back and watched. The Democrats have not done a good job at dealing with what's going on. I'm not just coming down on the Trump administration. I think the Trump administration is stirring the pot, and that's probably a good thing. It needed to be stirred. The
Hmm.
the question is, can can we cool down the pot before it boils over?
Yeah.
And that's the big question. Can we truly save democracy? Because I think I'm a very strong believer in democracy, and we've never really had it in the United States, but throughout our 250-year history, we've been kind of on an upward trend. You
Right.
know, women didn't have the right to vote until 1919, but they did get it. And then we've still got tremendous inequality and so on. but I think we were moving in the right direction. And it takes time. 250 years is not a lot in human history. But now it seems as though we've taken a step back, as have so many other countries. I'm really deeply concerned about this. I was just recently in the Republic of Georgia, which used to be part of the Soviet Union, and they're terrified. You know, they do not want to be part of the equivalent of the Soviet Union again, and they see what's happening in Ukraine. They are expecting that it will happen to them unless it gets stopped in Ukraine. And you hear this all over Europe, a tremendous amount of fear. We in the United States are very privileged in that we've got the Atlantic Ocean and the
Oh
Pacific
yeah.
Ocean and Canada and Mexico. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
these are not enemies. I mean, we're, it's getting close. Are we going to turn Canada and Mexico into enemies? That would be a terrible mistake. But I don't think we are going. I don't think that's going to happen. And so we've been so privileged because most every other country in the world has neighbors that at one time or another, including usually fairly recently, were their enemies. So,
Hmm.
so they're very aware of these kinds of threats. We're not. We're not. We're spoiled.
Yeah. 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 Well, something's gonna. I mean, I guess something's gonna. You're spoiled until something wakes you up in life. You know, that's usually how that's usually how it works. So, I'm hoping we can learn. You know, before we get one of those wake up calls that we're not. You know, that we're not very happy about. Um, Speaking of Ukraine. There was a whole, and I guess it wasn't a huge deal in the news, but it was kind of a couple of months back that Trump was trying to push Zelensky towards a mineral deal. You know, would that be the equivalent of, you know, extracting this pound of flesh that like, hey, we just propped you guys up for X amount of years and gave you X amount of billions of dollars, and now now you're expected to work with us whether you like it or not.
Yeah, we didn't give them that money. We've there's a lot of it is loans. Some of it has been
Oh, I
grants.
see.
Most of it is loans. And let's remember that most of that money, or a large share of it, came back to us for them to buy military equipment from us and other supplies from us. So yeah, and why are we in Ukraine? So the people of Republic of Georgia would say we went through the same thing. Soviet, I mean, Russia annexed large parts of the Republic of Georgia fairly recently, and the world didn't react at all.
When was
Why?
that?
It was what, 2000. Shit, I just came from there. 2007,
Okay,
2009.
so within the last 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I met with a lot of people who were told, you've got 48 hours, told by the Russians, you've got 48
Wow.
hours to get out of your house and move 350 miles away. We now have taken over this section. But who knows about that? I didn't really, I knew about it, but I didn't really know about it until I got there and talked to these people. And so they say, well, why doesn't the world know about it? Why Ukraine? Why not us
Mhm.
too? We
Mhm.
want to support Ukraine, but what about us? And the answer is they don't have the resources. Ukraine has these amazing resources that are available to it, including it's known as the breadbasket of Europe,
Yes, that's
the
right.
huge agricultural production. So that's why. And it's about these resources. It isn't about just human decency. From a
There's the thing
from a
is a free
policy
lunch.
standpoint, from a human standpoint, yes, you and I and many other people were very sympathetic to the Ukrainians or the Palestinians or whoever. So there's that human aspect, but from a governmental policy standpoint, it's all about resources. It's all about superpower status. And usually that also means it's about personal ambition of heads of state like President Xi of China and President Trump of the United States, or any president of the United States for that matter.
Yeah, I've heard before that the issue with organizations like governments or corporations is that they act like sociopaths in the way that they're kind of treated like people, but they're never responsible for actions they don't feel, you know, when they hurt someone or when they do anything. There's no sense of remorse or guilt or any kind of morality to kind of hold anyone back. And everyone kind of just points at the other person or looks up, you know, rather than to, and you know, and so I mean, I guess that would be the purpose of having generally speaking, democracy is to say is for the humans to say, whoa, like the humanity in this situation has gone way down, and the way that the way the government, which we don't even expect to behave like a human because they're not humans, it's just a machine that's like, almost like moving on its own accord. The way, we are going to re-navigate. We're going to take the steering wheel and we're going to, realign what the values and the way that we're behaving are, I guess, are. I'm not sure which one you put there, but I guess ideally that's what a democracy would be about, right?
Yeah, it's an unfortunate fact of history, I think, that uh, systems have been created that do encourage narcissistic sociopaths to rise to the top,
Hmm.
whether it's in government or business,
Sure.
at least big business. It's that's just there. Like, who wants that? Who wants those jobs except somebody who's narcissistic and sociopathic? I don't want one of those jobs, really. It's tough, and I wouldn't say that everybody that has those jobs is that way. And there's certainly varying degrees. Some are more so than others, but uh, it's a system that we've created that does that. That's not human nature, in my opinion. And as you know, I spend a lot of time with indigenous people in the Amazon
Hmm.
and elsewhere in the Himalayas and so on and so forth. And if you look at indigenous cultures throughout history, and let's face it, we all come out of indigenous cultures. It's in our DNA to want something better, to realize that as the indigenous people in the Amazon that I continue to spend a lot of time with understand, if anybody in a community is suffering needlessly, then everybody is suffering. So somebody may have a broken leg and they may suffer something, whatever. But if they're lacking in love, or they're lacking in food or water or housing or whatever, everybody suffers. You've got to take care of them. And when they form organizations to get together, for example, right now in the Amazon, it's a big step to oppose for the indigenous people to come together to oppose the oil companies and the Chinese big mining operations that are going in and cattle
Hmm.
ranch. And when they do that, they have a system where they elect for every community, they elect someone who can't serve for more than 2 years. And then that person then meets with the guy in the other communities of the same nation, who we used to call
Hmm.
tribe, but now at least in many parts they're recognized as nations.
That's
Uh,
cool.
and then they come together to elect one. So let's say the Achwa people of the Amazon, there's 46 different communities that send in 46 different representatives, and they are like one to meet with the representative from the Schwa Federation and the Kichwa Federation, and then they all come together, and it's all just for 2 years. So these people are elected to really serve the interests of the community. It's a bottom-up approach,
Yeah.
whereas we've got this top-down approach where you don't, you know, the community I live in, what's the chances that it's really going to have an impact outside of this community? And it's controlled by the top, and you don't get to the top. You don't get to be president of the United States unless you've got a huge support system behind you and a lot of money behind you. And the system is rigged for that way, and it's rigged. It's become increasingly rigged that way with Citizens United and recent Supreme Court decisions that really favor big corporations and favor the power of the executive branch of government.
I'm going to let you decide which path you want to go down. Do you want us to talk a little bit about China, or do you want to talk a little bit more about the South and Central American tribes and a little bit more of, the I want to go a little bit more into the other types of books that you've written and other types of work and philosophy and meditation and practices. Which path would you like to meander down?
Well, I think they're connected. So let's try this one. Uh,
Please.
the two biggest countries, the two most powerful countries in the world, China and the United States, contribute almost 50% of the world's economy, something between 40 and 50%, and also between 40 and 50% of the world's pollution. And what we've really done is created what economists are calling a death economy, an economic system that's killing itself. It's
Hmm.
polluting and consuming itself toward extinction, and it is based on this one goal of maximizing materialistic consumption and short-term profits for corporations. And it's
I'm sorry,
really
can I ask real quickly? I'm so sorry, but real quickly, China doesn't operate on that same time scale and corporate interest as America do they?
certainly not the same. No, they don't. And neither one of those. In the time scale, they look to the long term, much more
Okay,
than
but
we.
it's still considered a death economy in that sense.
Yeah, because what they're still looking at making huge profits, maximizing profits, regardless of social and environmental costs. And then
I
the
got you.
maximization of profits may include a little bit longer term, so it may not be quite as maximized.
Right,
But
right,
it's,
right.
yeah, and it's still looking at controlling the resources of the world.
Hmm.
And a major difference is that many of the big corporations in China are 51% or more owned by the Chinese government. So they don't really have to tax their corporations because they profit from them. They don't, you
Sure.
don't need you're already getting 51%. It's a hell of a lot more than we get from our corporation. So it's actually a very smart system. And their economic hitmen are just doing a bang up job. I mean, they're smart. I think, this map tells
Yeah,
you
show me again, please.
a
Yes.
lot of it. Yeah,
Can
I
you
think
explain
it's
the top and the bottom?
so
Yeah,
the top is in the year 2001, the United States was the number one trading partner in 80% of the world's countries. By 2023, China had taken over 70% of the world's countries were,
crazy,
and
crazy.
and and since 2023, it's gotten more so. So, China's economic hitman, uh, well, first of all, they have a great story to tell. And that is that they brought over 800 million people out of dire poverty. That's huge,
It's
and
incredible.
more than twice the population of the United States. And they had economic growth of around 10% a year for 30 years. Nobody else has ever done that. So if you're the president of a country in Africa or Latin America or other parts of the world that you want to develop your economy, you look at that as a pretty successful model. You may not like the Chinese government, you may not like the way they run, but you think that that economic system looks pretty damn good compared to the US system, where we've
Hmm.
had our federal minimum wage today is lower when adjusted for inflation than it was in 1973.
Wow,
And
that's
so,
crazy.
yeah, and some country, president of a country looks at this stuff, and also there's a tremendous resentment of the United States. If you're a Muslim country, you really resent the fact that the United States went into Iraq and Afghanistan and is supporting Israel against the Palestinians. This history and so many countries. We have military bases in over 100 countries. China has them in one, maybe two, and they're not really very strong military bases. They're supply bases. People don't like to be occupied by a foreign power. We didn't in the United States back in the 1700s when the British were here.
We
Uh,
almost went to war over Cuba.
yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and now Venezuela, we want to control the politics. I hate, Maduro. I like to see him go, but that's another story. Anyway, but the thing about China and the United States both is we're competing to expand the death economy. And the challenge today is to get these two countries that have so much influence and power politically, economically, militarily, to work to create a life economy. And a life economy, this gets back to the other side of the story here. The indigenous people have had life economies. Throughout the 200,000 plus years we've conceived ourselves as human beings, we've lived most of that time in life economies. It's only been
Yeah.
within the last several thousand years, and it's gotten worse in the last few decades, that we've had this death economy. And so the life economy, is a recyclable economy. It's a circular economy. It recycles, it circulates, and it doesn't destroy resources. It helps to replenish resources. So
Sure.
as a practical case, we pay people to clean up all the plastic that's floating around in the oceans and recycle it, to replant devastated environments, devastated forests, to restore all devastated environments, to recycle. to create new technologies. We've been on that path. Solar, wind, electric cars
Hmm.
has taken us in the right direction, but we need to go a lot further, a lot faster. And so the life economy is not about, going back and living in caves or having lousy lives. It's about paying ourselves and each other to do things that make the future of the world a better place, to make the world a better place for us, our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren. And it's exciting. I think this is an incredibly exciting time. That's why I say we're stirring the pot, and I'm hoping that out of this pot, comes an amazing stew of the life economy.
I would love that. Can you, so tell me some stories, perhaps, if you don't mind, of some of your experiences in South America or Central America and about the cultures. Because again, one of the things when I emailed you when I reached out, one of the things that I said, aside from how much I loved your book, was I've been learning more about different parts of the world I never dreamt, I could never even imagine existed, and you started bringing a lot of life to a lot of these South and Central American countries. So, do you want to just tell me some of your favorite aspects of these countries, or which countries in particular are, speak to you or resonate with you?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot that speak to and resonate with me. Uh, I'm particularly enthralled by the Amazonian people who live
Hmm.
so close to nature, and really believe that they are a part of nature, not apart from it. And that's the biggest thing. And I don't idealize these people. There are murderers amongst them. There are crazy people. There are wife beaters. There's good and bad people. They're people, but they have a philosophy of life that they live as part of the economy, as part of the
Hmm.
part of the natural world, part of the world. Whereas we have a philosophy that we are a part from the world, that we have a superior over it, and that's the basis of our problems. And so I take people on trips, the people who've read my books on indigenous cultures, often to learn from the indigenous people. And it's one of the aspects that they are most impressed with is how much these people live within the system as part of it. They're not destroying it. They are trying to keep others from destroying it. They're trying to keep us from destroying it. But they've always lived as part of it. And as I said, we all have that in our DNA. And
Do they have multiple religions or one religion, or what's their, how do they, what's their version of, I guess, of national storytelling or, philosophical compass, what's their compass?
yeah, I don't think you can generalize, and there's many different
There's a bunch of them.
ones. Yeah, but if you were to generalize, you'd say, they believe that everything has spirit, and soul, trees and the animals and the rocks and the rivers. So they honor that. And most of them believe in some bigger force that we would call God, or there's different words for it. And most of them believe in that beyond all of this, there's that. And they believe, for the most part, and again, I'm generalizing here, that, life, the soul never ends, that the body dies, but we transform often into trees or plants. Many of them believe that, being human is one of the toughest aspects. You don't want to come back as a human being. Uh, we're here as humans to learn about the difficulties. And humans have such power. So we're
Hmm.
here to learn how to use that power over the rest of nature to continue to support nature, to continue to be part of nature. And right now we're in this incredibly difficult, chaotic, but important time of really understanding that we need to evolve into a better understanding of what it means to be human beings, being
Hmm.
human on this planet.
Yeah.
And they understand that. And again, I don't idealize them as individuals, but as a philosophy of life to really understand this. And again, we all come from that. So I,
Hmm.
I love that about the indigenous people in the Amazon, but I also the Mayan people of Central America are incredible because they know that they went through something around the year 900 in our calendar, like what we're going through today. they had these huge pyramids, amazing, amazing
Yeah.
pyramids that just phenomenal. They built
And
these.
they don't get any attention relative to Egypt, right? Or very little
Oh,
attention relative
yeah,
to Egypt.
yeah. And to me, they're much more impressive than the Egyptian pyramids. I've spent time in both because
Oh
they're
yeah.
still used. The shamans still use them in their ceremonies. They're a living part of these people's lives, but they don't build them anymore. And so between the years 800 and 900 in our calendar, uh, they had drained the swamps and cut the forest in order to build these vast, spectacular cities. And there were dozens and dozens of these huge cities. Some are just now being discovered by LiDAR technologies. And and as they built these cities, they changed their environment, like we're doing. The rain stopped,
Yeah.
and the food dried up. And so the cities began to go to war with each other, which they'd always been peaceful before, over scarce resources. And then eventually the people who lived outside the cities but supported the cities, so you only had the royalty living in the cities and their administrators and their religious people, the upper class. The people who lived outside and supported the cities, gave them, provided the food and everything else, just said, we don't want to kill our neighbors anymore. We're leaving. And they went up into the mountains or deeper into the jungle. They abandoned the cities. The cities were grown over by nature took over, which is a wonderful aspect. And for
Hmm.
hundreds of years, nobody knew these pyramids were there. Maybe some of the Mayans knew, but nobody from the outside world knew until the 1800s when they were rediscovered and started to be excavated. But so today, the Mayan people who left and they kept their traditions,
Uh-huh.
their calendars, their incredible calendars, and their readings of the calendars, and their prophecies, and their fire ceremonies, and their respect for nature. And they lived very simply. They didn't. So they kept those things, but they didn't continue to build these cities.
Sure.
uh, they realize that you got to live much more simply, and have really good lives and enjoy your families and provide good food. So they've got this, and now they want to teach us because they've seen what happens when you take this too far.
So,
So, you know,
which countries in particular are these? Did this happen in? Did this? I just.
yeah,
Which countries are you talking about? Where did this happen?
well, for the Maya, they were basically what today we consider to be Guatemala,
Hmm.
Mexico, Honduras, El
Okay.
Salvador, and Belize, five countries, and probably the one that's done the most to kind of protect these sites and continue to use them is well, Mexico's done a good job, but it doesn't allow the shamans to do their ceremonies. Guatemala does. And so those two countries, Mexico and Guatemala are the ones that have the most preserved, uh, if they preserve this so
Are
I,
psychedelics part of their culture?
what? The
Are
Mayans,
psychedelics part of the culture? They're part of the.
what? I
Are
didn't
psych
hear you.
are psychedelics part of their culture?
Oh, with some of them, peyote
Hmm.
is now in the Amazon, and that's in Central America. Uh, and the fire ceremonies they do take you into altered states. I mean, they're amazing. So it's not something you ingest, but they do use peyote in some of them, but many of them don't use anything except the fire ceremonies. Historically, we don't know exactly what they did, but
Hmm.
now in the Amazon, ayahuasca is very important in many of these cultures. And you probably know what ayahuasca is, and that's, a very, very strong. This takes you into altered states. I just
I'm still
love.
here. Sorry, continue.
Okay, so yeah, but it's very interesting to me that I was trained as an ayahuasca shaman back in 1969. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, living deep in the jungle with the Shuar people, and I was dying at one point, and a Shuar shaman saved my life using ayahuasca, and then demanded that I become his apprentice for a couple of years. So I did, and
Wow. When was
and
this? How old, was this before or after your economic career?
long before. This is right after I got out of business school, and I joined the Peace Corps because it was a way to avoid the draft. And
Right.
I didn't believe in the war in Vietnam, so I joined the Peace Corps. They sent me deep into the Amazon, and I got very sick at one point. I was dying, and ayahuasca saved my life. And then I was trained as an ayahuasca shaman. And, I take people there now who one night we do it, because of the opportunity to do it. They don't, some of them don't, they don't have to. But,
Hmm.
I am concerned that some of these I think are being misused or overused now, because typically indigenous people will take ayahuasca once, just if they really need it. And some guy the other day asked me, he said, when was how many? He said, I took ayahuasca 20 times last year. How many times did you take it? I say, I haven't taken it for 10 years and I'm still working with that plant from 10
Hmm.
years ago. It's in me and it's working with me.
Yeah.
And the shamans who serve ayahuasca, when I was trained as that, you take it a lot more than that. But the normal people, you don't, it's not, I'm afraid in this culture that we're in now, to some degree with some people, it's almost become a social addiction. People say, well, there's an ayahuasca ceremony next Saturday night at so and so's house. Let's go. And that concerns me, that we may be misusing it like so many things that I mean, we can say we experience something similar with antibiotics, where antibiotics
Sure.
being used. We certainly have experienced with tobacco. Tobacco is another sacred plant that's used in the Amazon, and it's very, very important, but it's used in a special way and in ceremonial ways. We've perverted that in the United States and throughout most of the world by producing cigarettes that are terribly harmful. The way they use it
Because we
is,
consume, because we care about, well, we just care about just, trying to fill our insatiable, hunger for
yeah.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and if you have a great experience on ayahuasca tonight, yeah, to last night, if you had a great experience and you say, well, I want to do that again. Or if you
when
didn't have a good experience, you say, well, it didn't work, but I understand that might have just been that particular potion or whatever. I need to try some more. Whereas the fact of the matter is, in both times, it probably did work. You've just
Mhm.
got to understand it and maybe give it time to work with you, or for you to work with it, and not and really open yourself to what the plant's trying to tell you.
When I was dating my wife, we're married for just about 4 years, 4.5, 4 years now, and she asked me, one of the important conversations prior to our getting married, she was asking me about whether or not I consume drugs, and I told her, in full honesty, I was like, I've done LSD a couple of times, and she was like, and she couldn't understand me when I said, and she's like, "When's the last time you did it?" I said 2 years ago, and she couldn't understand that, in her head, like a drug was like something that like you want to do all the time, and I was like, I did that once, and I do not feel the need to, like, I will never, I won't do it again until I feel that calling. It's not a, it's not just something I just do or just take for fun. I mean, I could be like, I happen to be very into like, the counterculture, Grateful Dead, hippie kind of movement, but I think I'm very happy that I'm watching it as an observer from the side 100 years later, or, 70 years later, than, living in it at the moment. I'm sure I would have had a much harder time finding a healthy balance with, again, the consuming and the magic. But, one of the things I had to explain, and there's an enormous amount, I guess, of stigma or reputation around it, is that this isn't addicting. I'm not here to, at least if I'm trying to be thoughtful or conscientious about it. I'm
Yeah,
like, this is part of a journey and part of an experience. And I did a breathwork class recently. I keep on forgetting the name of, but it takes you into, I guess, another elevated state.
yeah.
And again, I did it to check on, I felt like I needed to check under the hood of my head and see where I was in my life. And I did it, and my wife keeps on asking me, she says, there's another class this week, another class this week. I'm like, I'm not there yet. I checked under the hood, and I'm still working with what it's telling me, but what you're saying deeply resonates with me.
Well, good. Yeah, no, it sounds like you're dealing with it just the right way. It is something that can be very, very important in our lives, but it can also be misused, and you've got to be conscious and mindful of the way that you use it. And I know I'm going to have to get off in about 5 minutes, but I
Mhm.
want to, I'd love to do more of this. I enjoy very
Yes.
much talking talking to you. So I'm sorry I've got to get off, but I have other
Maybe
commitments.
we'll do part two another time if you have
But,
time.
but, but I want to leave you with, I want to leave your listeners with five questions that we can all ask ourselves. So this to me is the key to where we're going. So if we want to transform the death economy to a life economy, we all know that there's certain practical things we can do: use less fossil fuels, um, eat a more plant-based diet, uh, you know, so many things that we can all do that we know that,
Consuming the way that we do. It's crazy.
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
five questions that go beyond that. And the first question is, what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? That's so important. So important. And I would answer that question by saying, I want to write. I love to write. My day is not complete unless I've spent an hour or two at least
Sure.
writing. I have a friend who's a carpenter at the opposite end of the spectrum. He says, I want to work with my hands in wood. Question
Hmm.
two, how do I do this in a way that'll help transform the death economy to a life economy? So whether
Yeah.
you're a plumber, a teacher, a parent, a student, a carpenter, a writer, whatever you are, a podcast host, that's what you want to do. But how are you going to do it in a way that makes the world a better place? And as a writer, I'd say I'm going to write about those things and try to inspire people. And my carpenter friend would say, "Well, I'm only going to use sustainable woods, and I'm going to plant a tree for every tree, or hire somebody to plant a tree for every tree that's cut for my work." And the
Hmm.
question number three is, what's stopping you? What voice is telling you, well, you're not good enough to do that? You don't have the time to do that. That would be it. For a writer, you might be, yeah, like I know that to be a successful writer, I've got to write for at least 2 hours a day. I don't have time. And my carpenter friend might say, well, my clients don't want to pay the extra price for me to plant trees and use sustainable materials. Question four, when you really confront that blockage, that thing that's holding you back. Number three, when you really confront it, when you don't run away from it, when you go out and touch it, when you confront it, uh, how does it change your perception? Because we change reality by changing our perceptions.
Hmm.
And and I would say, as a writer, well, I could stop watching television for 2 hours every night and write, or get up a little early in the morning and write. My carpenter friend would say, I'm going to tell my clients that the extra price is not a cost. It's an investment in the future. They're investing in the future.
Sure.
And the fifth question is, what actions do I take immediately? Where do I get started? What am I going to start writing about? In the carpenter, I got to start, building cabinets using material and telling my clients that they're investing in the future. And I think, if we all do that, we can all take different paths, but we're all going to head toward transforming the death economy to a life economy. Very
I hope
exciting time
so.
to be alive,
It
but we
is.
have the opportunity to do this.
Yeah, I think the most important question that realization I think one of the most important I've ever had in my life is that I'm the only thing that's ever holding myself back from anything. Like
Yeah.
that changed when I realized that changed everything about the way I live, about the way I think, about the way I act, about the way I exercise and eat, and the way I conduct business. Is I'm the only thing that's getting in the way of myself,
Mm.
or not. I could be my best friend or my worst enemy, but just that realization that there's no one out there but you that's putting that block in front of you, I think was really important. John, thank you so much for the time, for your incredible work. Maybe we'll be able to do part two if you have time, because I think this is awesome, and I would love to talk to you about this. While we were talking, I have 100 notes that I'm of follow-up ideas that I have. But one day, I hope I'll be able to do this again. Thank you.
Let's
This is
let's
amazing.
do it again, and maybe we want to concentrate more on the indigenous and the use of some of the plants and yeah.
I'm
Let's
sorry, real quickly as we close. I'm sorry. Becoming I guess, a trained shaman in ayahuasca, and then going off and being an economic hitman. w- Did you, what was the, did you have an internal conflict the whole time, or were you again ideal? Like,
that has to
di-
be in the next show.
that's be the next show. Okay, we'll lead off with that question. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate everything. Take care. All the best.